I was at a conference recently about, it's none of your business. I was at this important conference and I was listed in the program as a motivational speaker because, it's great because if they list me as an unsung comedy legend, then people come up to me and they say something funny. And I say, well, the other day after morning nap, my mom, Pat, came down to the basement even though she's not allowed to without permission, but I didn't come here tonight to talk about Pat because she's not the boss of me anymore. I'm the bomb. I'm the boss of myself. And it goes on like that for a while. And they don't want that. They want to surprise everyone. So they say, you're going to be listed as a motivational speaker. And then when people say, what do? I say, well, on Thursday before dinner, I'm going to give some communication tips to make your interactions in the office a little bit more productive. And then they say, I left something at the registration table. And they leave. It works every time. It's amazing. And by the way, this was the fanciest conference I've ever worked. Here's an example of how fancy it was. One morning, I was awakened by the sound outside my window of a meditative yoga class. Yeah. To give you some context, usually I wake up at the cheapest hotel that they put me up in to the stampeding feet of people racing hungover to the free breakfast in the lobby of the crappy hotel, or maybe light gunplay. But this place, so fancy. They had the gongs, gong, gong, and they had the little bells, chilling, chilling. Inhale and hold it, and follow your breath to the most relaxing place. And the only thing more relaxing than a deep meditation is being asleep, which is where I was like 3 minutes before they started the whole percussion show. It's noisy and lame, but so fancy. There are different levels of fancy, right? You have non-fancy, which is most of the people, most of the time, like wearing shorts at theater. No, it's fine. Most of the people, most of the time, non-fancy. There's no harm in that. There's no shame, all right? Then you have like regular fancy, and it doesn't have to be people. It could be like penguins. People think penguins are fancy because they have a tuxedo. Or ketchup packets. If you look closely at some ketchup packets, it says fancy ketchup. If it has a specific gravity of 1.15, that's fancy ketchup. And then beyond that is extra fancy. And those are things like formal events, like a prom or a wedding or a funeral, or like 4 weddings and a funeral. That's extra fancy. And although I would say if you're getting married more than 4 times, your fancy level is probably going to drop a bit, I would imagine. I mean, I'm not on the committee or anything, but 4 or 5 till death do us parts, your score's coming down, I would imagine. And then there's top fancy, which is all fancy all the time, and you never see that. It's very rare. It's mostly royalty. This is true. You can look this up when you get home. There was a queen of Thailand in the 1800s who was top fancy, and she was so fancy, nobody could touch her. That's how fancy she was. And one day she was on one of her ships. Doesn't matter, all right? She was on one of her ships going to this very fancy ketchup tasting event. It gets better, and then she fell off the boat into the water. I know, and nobody could touch her, and so she drowned because she was top fancy, and no one could touch her. I know, it's tragic back then. Now, it's okay to laugh a little bit, but at the time, very, very tragic. And they said, we can't have this going forward. So then they had the conclave of fanciness of 1887, I think, and they decided that if you wore white gloves, it was okay to touch a fancy person. So if you go to an event and there's a server there with white gloves, that goes all the way back to the conclave of fanciness of 1887, I think. The Queen of England once told me that being top fancy all the time blows. I'm paraphrasing. But she's top fancy, and she's got a lot of castles, as you would imagine, but sometimes she goes to events outside of her kingdom or queendom. I don't know what it is. All right. For example, a couple years ago, she went to celebrate the 800th anniversary of the Magma Sutra thing. And so she's going over there, And they're like, the queen is coming, and they clean everything up, and it's not good enough. So then they paint everything, and it's not dried yet, and the queen's coming. And so they bring out these huge royal fans that say, huzzah, and they dry everything, but it's still a little tacky and a little moist. And that is what, anything outside the queen's bubble smells like moist paint. That's what you told me, which would be a great name for a band, wouldn't it? The Queen's Bubble? Or moist paint. But everything smells like moist paint. I was telling you something before. This resort where the conference was, I believe, was probably top fancy because everything was the nicest I'd ever seen. Here's an example. The first thing they asked me after I checked in, they said, at what time would you like your fresh squeezed orange juice and newspaper of choice delivered to your casita, Mr. Mac? Yeah, casita is Spanish. It means little chicken taco. It was so fancy. There was a hot tub right in my backyard there. And it wasn't hot then, but I pressed a button, and now it's hot. And then now it's not. Hot, not hot. It was pretty fancy. And then there's a dressing room and a foyer, and then the closet area, and then behind that is the restroom, and I'm taking pictures of everything because I can't believe it. And then the toilet sees me, and it does, because it went, and its lid lifted up. It was like the sealed lid. It came up, and so I went over there, and I'm like, you know what? I have to go anyway. And so I went to lift up the seat, and it didn't want to give, and I didn't want to break this thing because this toilet costs more than my house. And there were a bunch of buttons on the toilet, and there was a picture of a leaf. Like, when am I going to need a leaf? I don't know what that's for, but I figure, you know what? I'll just sit down, right, and do it lady style. So I sit down. Seat was warm, for one thing, totally fancy, right? But total revelation because I've got both hands free and my phone. I've never been so productive in my life. Seriously, they say if you want to get something done, give it to a mom or somebody like that, because when they're in work mode, you can't stop them. And I totally get it because I was in the zone and I did all my stuff. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a little social media, scroll, post. I check the scores of my team, search. I got an email from the conference that says, oh, tomorrow's theme is productivity. If you've got any time-saving tips, please send them in. And I'm like, you're not going to believe this. But if you want to multitask like a mother figure, just make pee-pee lady style. Send #revelation.